Samantha was a typical college student, with a busy schedule and a love for adventure. She was studying to be a nurse and spent most of her time in classes and clinicals, but when she wasn't working, she loved to explore and try new things. So when a mysterious stranger named Alex asked her out on a date, she couldn't resist the opportunity for something new. They met at a secluded park on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods and a misty fog. Alex was tall and handsome, with piercing blue eyes and a charming smile. He was dressed in all black, which added to his mysterious aura, and seemed to know the area well. As they walked along the path, he regaled her with stories of his travels and adventures, and she found herself captivated by his charismatic personality. He talked about his experiences traveling to different countries and how he loved to explore the unknown. He made her feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered. But as the night went on, Alex's behavior started to change. He became increasingly aggressive and controlling, insisting that they take a detour into the woods. Despite her growing unease, Samantha followed him, eager to see where the night would take her. She wanted to trust him, and didn't want to come across as rude or unadventurous. She thought maybe he knew some secret spot or hidden trail that would take her breath away. As they delved deeper into the woods, the trees grew thicker and the darkness closed in around them. The path became narrower and harder to navigate, and the mist turned into a thick fog that made it hard to see. Suddenly, Alex grabbed her arm and pulled her towards a clearing. It was then that she saw the circle of hooded figures, candles flickering in the darkness, and the altar in the center. She saw the symbols and the ritualistic artifacts and realized she was in the middle of a cult ceremony. Her date had been a trap, a lure to bring her to this dark and twisted place. The cult members, dressed in dark robes and masks, were chanting in a language she didn't understand, and in the center of the room stood an altar with a knife for sacrifice. The atmosphere was eerie, and the dimly lit room added to the horror of the situation. "What the hell is going on here? Who are you people?" Samantha yelled, her voice trembling with fear. One of the cult members stepped forward, his voice cold and menacing. "You have been chosen for the sacrifice, my dear. Your blood will bring us power and prosperity." Panic and fear threatened to overwhelm her as she realized the truth. She had fallen into a trap set by a cult, and they planned to sacrifice her as part of their twisted rituals. She could feel their eyes on her, the cold and calculating gaze of the cult members, and she knew she had to act fast. With adrenaline pumping through her veins, she fought back against the cult members with all her might. She remembered all the self-defense moves she had learned and put them to use. She kicked and punched, and she didn't hold back. She was determined to survive and escape, and she would not go down without a fight. "You're not getting away with this," she screamed as she fought back. She used her agility and quick thinking to dodge and evade the cult members' attacks. She was aware of her limits and knew when to retreat. She was careful not to let them corner her, keeping a distance and using her voice to call for help. "Someone help me. Please," she yelled as she fought for her life. The cult members were caught off guard by her sudden resistance. She didn't let up, and she fought with all her strength and her will to live. Samantha's efforts paid off, and she managed to break free from the grasp of the cult members. She ran as fast as she could, not looking back, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of the woods. She knew she had to find help and fast, so she kept running until she stumbled upon a ranger station. She banged on the door, yelling for help, and thankfully, a ranger answered. She explained her situation, and the ranger immediately called for backup and an ambulance. She was grateful for the ranger's help and knew that she wouldn't have made it without him. Shaken but alive, Samantha walked away from the clearing, her heart racing with the thrill of adventure and the knowledge that she had just escaped death. She knew that she would never forget this night and the mysterious stranger who had led her into the unknown. She realized that sometimes, things are not what they seem and it's better to trust her instincts. She was grateful for the lessons she had learned and the strength she had found within herself. From then on, she was more cautious in her choices, but she never lost her love for adventure and the thrill of the unknown. Lena was a young woman who had always been hesitant to try online dating. But one day, she decided to give it a chance and created a profile on a popular dating app. She was soon matched with a charming man named David who seemed perfect on paper. He had a great job, a sense of humor, and shared the same interests as her. They decided to meet in person, and David suggested a fancy restaurant in the city. Lena was excited. She had never been to this place before and she was looking forward to a night out. As she got ready, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. The date started off great. David was just as charming in person as he was online, and they had an easy conversation over dinner. But as the night went on, Lena started to notice strange coincidences. David seemed to know an unusual amount of information about her, and he kept mentioning things that she had never told him. Lena's nerves turned to fear as she realized that David may not be who he seems. She tried to brush it off, but her gut was telling her something was off. Suddenly David's attitude changed. He became aggressive and controlling. He insisted that they leave the restaurant and go somewhere more private. Lena knew she had to act fast. She excused herself to the restroom and quickly called a friend to pick her up. She then made an excuse to David that she was feeling unwell and had to leave. David didn't take it well and tried to convince her to stay, but Lena was determined to leave. As she waited outside the restaurant for her friend to arrive, David's true nature was revealed. A local news report came on the TV inside the restaurant, showing David's picture and describing him as a serial killer who preys on women he meets through dating apps. Lena's heart raced as she realized she had narrowly escaped a deadly fate. She was relieved when her friend arrived and they quickly left the area. David was a determined and dangerous individual. He had a plan and he was not going to let a simple rejection stop him from achieving it. Once Lena had left the restaurant, he followed her closely, keeping a low profile but making sure she couldn't lose him. He knew she would be his next victim, and he was not about to let her get away. As Lena and her friend were driving away, David followed them closely in his car, never letting them out of his sight. He knew where they were heading, and he had planned for this. He had prepared for the possibility of her trying to escape, and he was not going to let her succeed. He followed them all the way to her house. Her friend dropped her and left. As soon as she left, David struck. He broke into the house, and Lena soon found herself in a fight for her life. She was confronted by a determined and ruthless killer who was not going to stop until he had achieved his goal. Lena's initial shock and fear were quickly replaced by adrenaline and the will to survive. She knew she had to act fast and use all her strength and cunning to outsmart and outrun him. She had to use her knowledge of self-defense and her will to live to fight off David and escape. The fight was intense, and it was not certain whether Lena would make it out alive. David was relentless and determined, but Lena was not going to give up without a fight. She used everything she had to fend him off, using the furniture and anything she could find as weapons. She fought with all her might, determined to survive. In the end, Lena was able to outsmart and outrun David, and she managed to escape and call the police. But it was a close call, and she knew that if she had not been prepared, she would not have made it out alive. She learned a valuable lesson that night, to always trust her instincts and never be too trusting of strangers, especially those you meet online. Emma and Jack were a young couple who had just started dating. They had met through a mutual friend and had hit it off right away. They had been talking about going on a hike together for their first date, and they decided to take the opportunity to explore the beautiful woods that surrounded their town. The day started off great. They packed a picnic lunch and set off on the trail, eager to enjoy each other's company and the beautiful scenery. They chatted and laughed as they walked, taking in the sights and sounds of the woods. But as the day went on, they got lost in the maze of trails and soon found themselves wandering deeper into the woods. As the sun began to set, they started to realize that they were lost. They had no idea how to get back to the trailhead, and night was fast approaching. They knew they had to find shelter before it got dark, so they kept walking, hoping to come across a cabin or a ranger station. Just as they were about to give up hope, they came across an abandoned cabin in the middle of the woods. It was small, but it looked sturdy, and it had a chimney. They were relieved and quickly made their way inside, eager to escape the cold and the dark. The cabin was dusty and abandoned, but it was a roof over their head, and they were grateful for that. They started a fire in the fireplace and settled in for the night. But as the night went on, strange things started to happen. They started to hear strange noises, like footsteps and whispering, coming from the other room. The fire in the fireplace flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They felt a presence in the room and saw shadows moving across the windows. They were convinced that there was something or someone else in the cabin with them. As they tried to investigate, they found some old newspapers and diary hidden in the cabin, which revealed the past of the cabin and the previous occupants. They discovered that the cabin belonged to a man who had died there under mysterious circumstances. He had been living alone in the cabin for years and was found dead in his bed, but the cause of his death was never determined. Emma and Jack soon realized that the ghost of the previous occupant was still trapped in the cabin, unable to find peace. They understood that the ghost was angry and vengeful, and they knew they had to find a way to escape before it's too late. They knew they had to find a way to communicate with the ghost, to understand its story and put it to rest. They knew they had to be brave and keep a clear head if they were going to survive this night and escape the haunted cabin. They tried to communicate with the ghost, trying to understand why it was still trapped in the cabin and what it wanted. They searched through the cabin, looking for any clues that could help them understand the ghost's story. They found a hidden room in the basement, which contained old photographs and personal possessions of the previous occupant. They pieced together the story of the ghost, a man who had lived alone in the cabin for years. He had been lonely and isolated, and he had died alone in his bed. They realized that the ghost was trapped in the cabin, unable to move on because of his regrets and unfulfilled desires. With this new understanding, Emma and Jack knew they had to help the ghost find peace. They gathered all the personal possessions they found and placed them on the altar they found in the hidden room. They lit candles and said a prayer for the ghost's soul to find peace and move on to the afterlife. As they finished the prayer, the ghost appeared before them in a vision. It thanked them for their kindness and for understanding its story. It told them that it was finally ready to move on and find peace. The ghost vanished, and the cabin was filled with a peaceful energy. The fire in the fireplace died down, and the shadows on the walls disappeared. Emma and Jack felt a weight lifted off their shoulders, and they knew that the ghost had finally found peace. They left the cabin with a sense of accomplishment and the knowledge that they had helped someone find peace. They knew that this would be a night they would never forget, and they were grateful for the experience they had shared. Sarah had been going to the gym for a few months, and she had been making steady progress with her fitness goals. One day, she met a man named Michael at the gym, and they started talking. He was charming and seemed genuinely interested in her. After a few conversations, they exchanged numbers, and Michael asked her out on a date. Sarah was excited to go on a date with Michael. He seemed perfect, good-looking, polite, and well-educated. They met at a trendy restaurant downtown. The conversation was flowing easily, and Sarah was having a great time. But as the night went on, she started to notice some strange behavior from Michael. He seemed to know a lot about her, even though they had only talked a few times. He asked her questions that seemed too personal, and he kept staring at her in a way that made her feel uncomfortable. Sarah tried to brush it off as nerves, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. As they were leaving the restaurant, Michael suggested they go for a walk in the park nearby. But as they walked, Sarah felt like she was being watched. She looked around, but she couldn't see anyone. She became increasingly uneasy, and she knew she had to get out of there. Sarah excused herself, saying she was feeling unwell and needed to go home. Michael seemed disappointed but didn't protest. As Sarah walked away, she heard him calling her name, but she didn't turn back. She knew she had to get away as fast as she could. Once she was home, Sarah called a friend and told her what had happened. Her friend suggested she contact the police and report Michael's behavior. Sarah did as advised and reported the strange behavior of Michael. Sarah did her best to put the strange encounter with Michael out of her mind, but she couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She tried to go back to her normal routine, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. She started to notice that he was showing up at the same places she was, and he always seemed to be watching her. She would see him standing at a distance, watching her every move. Sarah was on edge, always looking over her shoulder, unsure if Michael was following her. She was constantly checking her surroundings and avoiding going out alone. She was also looking into getting a restraining order against Michael. One day, while she was at work, she received a message from Michael on her work email. The message was disturbing, and it made her feel uneasy. Sarah knew she had to do something, so she decided to contact the police. She explained her situation and the strange behavior of Michael. The police took her statement and started an investigation. They also advised her to be extra cautious and to let them know if she saw Michael again. As the investigation went on, the police found out that Michael had a history of stalking and harassment. He had been arrested several times in the past for similar behavior, but he had always managed to avoid any serious consequences. Sarah was relieved when Michael was finally arrested and charged for stalking. She knew it would take time to heal and move on from the trauma, but she was determined to put this behind her and move forward with her life. It was a Friday evening, and a group of friends, Alex, Ryan, Rachel, and Emily, decided to go on a double date at an escape room. They had heard great things about the place and were excited to test their skills and see if they could solve the puzzles and escape before the time ran out. As soon as they arrived, the staff gave them a brief introduction and explained the rules of the game. They were to be locked in a room and given a set of clues and puzzles to solve. If they were able to solve them all and escape the room before the time ran out, they would win a prize. The group was split into teams, with Alex and Ryan in one team, and Rachel and Emily in the other. They were given a set of clues and puzzles and set off to solve them. At first, the game was fun, and they were working well together, but as they progressed, they started to notice strange things. The puzzles seemed to be getting harder and more complex, and the clues seemed to be leading them in circles. As the group of friends delved deeper into the escape room, they began to notice strange inconsistencies in the puzzles and clues. The objects and props in the room seemed to be poorly made and out of place. They started to suspect that something was off. One of the friends found a hidden camera, which made them all realize that they were being watched. They began to piece together the clues and realized that the escape room was not just a game, but a trap set by a madman who was using the escape room as a cover for his true intentions, to kidnap them. They knew they had to work together to escape before it was too late. They tried to communicate with the staff, but their calls for help went unanswered. They were on their own, and they had to rely on each other to survive. They knew that the madman was watching their every move. They had to be careful not to trigger any of the traps or they would be caught. Finally, they were able to solve the final puzzle and unlock the door. They rushed out of the room, only to find themselves in a dark and creepy corridor. They knew that the madman was still out there, and they had to keep moving. As they approached the door, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind them. They turned around and saw the madman, a shadowy figure dressed in black, holding a knife. He sneered at them, "You should have stayed in the room, now you'll never leave alive." The group of friends knew they had to act fast. One of them, who had a background in martial arts, stepped forward and distracted the madman with a quick kick while the others ran towards the door. The madman was caught off guard and stumbled back, giving them a chance to escape. They quickly unlocked the door and ran outside, only to find themselves in a deserted forest. They realized that the escape room was built in an isolated location, and they had to find a way to get out of there before the madman caught up with them. They followed the corridor, using their flashlights to guide them, and finally, they came to a door that led outside. They pushed it open and found themselves in a deserted alleyway. They knew they were safe and they had escaped just in time. The group of friends were shaken but relieved that they had survived the dangerous trap. They reported the incident to the authorities, and the owner of the escape room was arrested. They knew that they had to be more careful in the future when choosing an adventure to go on, but they were grateful for the bond they had formed, working together to escape the trap.